They took the wrong daughter, but worse, they underestimated the wrong man. What would you do if everything you lived for was ripped away in an instant? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe as we follow a story that'll leave your heart racing and your soul stirred. The steel of Jim Dalton's old Beretta 92 FS felt as familiar in his hand as the calluses that still lined his fingers. He wasn't aiming it at anyone, not today, just cleaning it, ritualistically, methodically, as he did every Thursday afternoon, sitting on the back porch of his weather-beaten farmhouse that overlooked 60 acres of stubborn Texas soil. His hands moved with a calm precision, like he was still in the Corps, still breaking down his sidearm before a mission. The war was long behind him, the medals, the deployments, the classified operations in the worst parts of the world, all of it tucked into a box in the attic and locked behind eyes that didn't blink much anymore. But even in retirement, Jim never really stood down. Marines don't retire, they just shift fire. His daughter Emily had teased him about that once. "Dad, you're like a wolf pretending to be a golden retriever, all friendly and calm until someone steps wrong, then it's teeth and fire." She wasn't wrong. Emily was the only person who could get away with calling him out like that. Maybe it was because she reminded him so much of her mother. Rest her soul. Or maybe it was because she never looked at him like a broken man, the way others did when they found out he'd served with Force Recon. She looked at him like her hero. Always had. Jim glanced at his watch. Emily should have texted by now. Every day, without fail, she messaged when she finished her shift at the small border clinic about an hour south. Sometimes just a "done" or an "on my way." Once, "patients today had more holes than a screen door," which made him chuckle. But today, nothing. He stood, slowly, carefully, like every bone was under surveillance. Then, with that familiar sixth sense, that alertness that no therapist or VA doctor could explain, he scanned the horizon. Not for threats, but for signs. Change. Something off. She was never late. Not without reason. Inside the house, Jim's movements sharpened. The phone was cold to the touch when he picked it up. No texts, no calls. He tried her once. Straight to voicemail. That was enough. He walked into the hallway and opened the small wooden cabinet just inside the coat closet. Inside, on a rack of dark velvet, were 3 weapons, all perfectly cleaned, maintained, and locked in with soft clips. The Beretta, a Remington 870 shotgun, and his custom M4 carbine, one that had been through 2 continents and still cycled smooth. He chose none of them yet. Instead, Jim went back to the kitchen, pulled out a yellowed notepad from the drawer, and began scribbling details. Emily's last known location, the estimated time she should have arrived, plate number of her car, route she usually took. He had contacts. Old friends, quiet ones. Not the kind who posted on Facebook or had LinkedIn pages. The kind whose numbers were only remembered, not stored. The kind you called only when you didn't want to be found. His fingers hovered over the digits. Then, slowly, he began to dial. Meanwhile, 50 miles south, along a cracked service road outside of Presidio, Emily's Toyota Corolla sat abandoned, its doors open, a shattered phone on the driver's seat, and 2 sets of boot prints trailing into the brush. The road was silent, empty, and sun-bleached, like the desert had swallowed her whole. Back at the house, Jim got no answers. Not from the hospital, not from the sheriff, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. "She's a grown woman, Jim," Sheriff Randall said, dragging each word like it cost him. "Probably just lost signal. Happens out there. Let's give it a few hours, all right?" "Hours?" Jim's voice didn't raise. It never needed to. She could be over the border by then. The silence on the other end of the line was proof enough the sheriff hadn't considered that. Jim ended the call. The Marine inside him wasn't dormant anymore. It was waking up. Fast. He pulled open his laptop and launched a GPS program he rarely touched, the one tied to Emily's phone. She'd agreed to it years ago. "Just in case," she'd said. Jim called it insurance. The ping showed her last location 6 hours ago. 10 miles north of the Rio Grande, near a gas station off a state road that hadn't seen a repaving in a decade. There was nothing out there, nothing but borderland, coyotes, and the kind of shadows that swallowed people whole. And Jim knew, deep down, like muscle memory, this wasn't random. Cartel territory ran through that area like veins. It wasn't always drugs anymore. It was people. Women, nurses, easy targets, especially those who worked close to the border and kept a routine. Emily had a routine, and somebody was watching. He closed the laptop. Then he opened the cabinet again. This time he reached for the M4. He stripped off his flannel, revealing the faded tattoo on his arm, an eagle, globe, and anchor. Below it, etched in hard ink, were the words Semper Fi. The wolf wasn't pretending anymore. He opened the door, stepped outside, and locked it behind him. Not like he was coming back for dinner. Down the porch stairs he loaded the rifle. And as he reached his truck, parked under the rusted carport, he muttered only one word, more to himself than anyone else. Coming, because they had taken something from him, and God help them when he found out who. The white Dodge Ram rumbled like a caged beast beneath Jim as he steered it south, its tires eating up the blacktop like it owed him answers. The sun was dipping toward the west, but there was no beauty in the sky today, just dust trails and memories he didn't want to entertain. His eyes flicked from the GPS mounted on the dash to the open road, back and forth, focused and ready. He'd driven this route before, years ago, before the border towns were ruled by silence and fear. Before cartel safe houses disguised as mechanic shops, ranches, or trailers took root like cancers across the landscape. He wasn't wearing his usual farm jacket now. Instead, a tightly zipped tactical fleece, dark green and snug enough not to snag. In the back seat, duffel bags, ammo cans, a trauma kit. In the front seat beside him, a printed-out satellite map marked with red ink. Circles around the exact stretch of road where Emily's last signal went cold. He hadn't called the feds. Not yet. Too many strings, too many delays. Emily didn't have time for red tape. As he pulled onto the service road, the pavement faded to gravel, loose, unpredictable. The truck's suspension groaned under the shift, but Jim's hands stayed firm on the wheel. About a mile in, he spotted it, the small clearing where the tracker had pinged. No tire marks from other vehicles, no camera poles, just open land and fading light. He rolled to a stop and killed the engine. Silence hit hard, not a bird, not a breeze. His boots crunched into the gravel as he stepped out, rifle slung over his shoulder, every motion deliberate. He moved like a ghost, his body light on the terrain, eyes scanning the ground for anything out of place. A few minutes in, he found it, a faint smear in the dust, like something had been dragged. He crouched low. His fingers hovered just above it. Disturbed earth cracked and spread like a ripple. Footprints, 3 sets, heavy, rushed. One was small, Emily's size. His gut twisted, but he didn't allow the emotion to surface. Instead, he followed the trail with his eyes. The tracks veered off into the brush, straight toward an old livestock fence, rusted and half-collapsed. Beyond it, the flatland stretched all the way to the Rio Grande. It wasn't a robbery, not a carjacking. They didn't take her keys or wallet. The car hadn't been hidden or torched. That meant they weren't worried about being traced. That meant they were confident, protected. Jim's jaw clenched. He recognized the signature. It was Cartel. But the question wasn't who. It was which one. Gulf, Sinaloa, some splinter group. It didn't matter. They all bled the same. He snapped a photo of the tracks and texted it to an old contact, Luis Herrera, a former DEA field agent turned private investigator. Luis had gone dark for a while, but if anyone knew the latest cartel routes, it was him. Jim's message was short. 3 targets, female taken, Presidio area, need, heat maps, safe houses. ASAP. JD. Then he waited. Not long. 5 minutes later, a reply came with a single word. Yeah, that was enough. Luis didn't promise unless he delivered. Back in the truck, Jim reviewed the topography. 2 miles from the abduction site was an old feed silo that had been closed since 2013. He remembered it from recon work with Border Patrol 10 years back. Rumor had it the place had been bought by a shell corporation and quietly reinforced. Locals didn't go near it. He folded the map and started the engine. 10 minutes later, the silo came into view, like a lone sentinel against the evening sky. The road was barely passable now, overgrown with weeds and broken fence posts. As Jim parked off the road and killed the headlights, a slow tension crept through his spine. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. There were vehicles parked behind the silo. A white van, dust-covered but fresh. 2 motorcycles. A rust-colored Ford with Mexican plates. He slipped out of the truck and into the shadows, his body melting into the terrain like he was born in it. Every step was rehearsed, every breath controlled. He circled to the back, avoiding the direct approach. From his pack, he pulled out a thermal monocular. Scanned. 2 men inside the main structure, one pacing near a window, one seated. Movement in a side room, small, quick, could be her. No sentries outside, sloppy. Jim didn't waste time. He moved like water, closing the distance to the structure's side. Up close, the silo had been retrofitted. Steel reinforcements, barred windows, but the side door had a deadbolt, nothing else. Probably felt secure out here. Probably thought no one would come looking. He slid a breeching wedge from his belt and inserted it low. Applied torque until the bolt snapped with a quiet pop. Inside, the air was stale and stunk of fuel, sweat, and something coppery. He cleared the entry hall quickly, 2 rooms empty. Then a noise, metal scraping. He crept forward just past a rusted water heater and caught sight of a boot stepping into view. The man was tall, lean, armed with a pistol. Cartel tattoos up the neck. Jim grabbed him from behind, arm around the throat, his other hand covering the mouth. A single, tight twist. No sound. The body slumped gently to the ground. Jim caught it before it hit. He moved deeper into the structure. From the far room came a voice, Spanish, hurried, laughing. Another man. Alone. Jim entered fast, low, rifle up. Manos arriba. The man froze, instinctively reaching for the ceiling. His gun was on the table, too far to matter. Jim approached, rifle steady. Where is she? I don't. Jim hit him with the stock, not enough to kill, just enough to silence the lie. He repeated the question. The man nodded toward the side room. Jim moved. And there, in the corner of a makeshift holding room, behind a barred partition, sat Emily. Her face was bruised, hands bound, but her eyes lit up the second she saw him. "Dad," she whispered. He dropped to his knees and cut the restraints. "It's okay, baby. I'm here now." "No," she said, urgent, panicked. "There's more coming. I heard them. They were calling for backup. You have to—" Behind them, tires screamed outside. Too late for stealth now. Jim stood and chambered around. "Stay behind me," he said. The wolves were coming. But this was his Dan now. Jim had already counted the engines before the first one skidded to a stop. 3 vehicles, minimum 6 men. Heavy engines, some modified, pickup trucks, maybe an SUV, none of them subtle. These weren't scouts. This was reinforcement, the kind that answered to no one but the boss. He stood in front of Emily, blocking the open doorway that led from the makeshift cell to the silo's main hall. She'd wrapped her arms around herself, blinking against the pain and the flood of adrenaline, her voice trembling. "They said they'd bring her," she whispered. "Someone important. I don't know what it meant." Jim's eyes didn't move from the doorway. His mind was spinning, stacking variables. She wasn't cargo, at least not ordinary cargo. This was personal, for whoever was on the other end of the next wave. He stepped forward, rifle up, eyes sharp. Then a voice outside. Thick accent, grating like sandpaper over steel. "Bring out the girl, old man. We know you're in there. You got 5 seconds." Jim didn't respond. 4. He slid the duffel bag over, pulling free a fragmentation grenade. 3. He tugged the pin, held the spoon. 2. He waited. Oh, and as the word faded into the heavy desert silence, Jim stepped just far enough to lob the grenade out the silo door. The explosion hit like thunder, shattering the pretense. Shouts followed, one high-pitched and full of panic. Dust filled the air. Jim moved fast, clearing the room to the left of the entrance where the noise came thickest. 2 silhouettes emerged in the dust, one stumbling, one raising a weapon. Jim dropped them both with double taps, the shots echoing sharp and final. No time to check. He backpedaled and called to Emily. "Now." She ran as best she could, barefoot, knees buckling once but catching herself on a wall. He pulled her into the next room, the one with the broken window barred on the outside. He slammed the door shut behind them and bolted it. It wouldn't hold long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. He lifted his rifle and handed her the pistol he'd taken off the cartel soldier. "You shoot only if they come through that door, and you aim for the center, got it?" Her hands were shaking, but her jaw set with that same Dalton stubbornness he'd seen since she was 6. "I got it." Outside, more movement. Boots over gravel, Spanish curses, metal being shifted. Then a different sound. A low voice, smooth, calm, like someone who didn't need to yell to be feared. "El Fantasma," the voice said, just loud enough for Jim to hear. The ghost. He froze. It wasn't just a name. It was his name. His call sign back in Kandahar when he ran black ops for units that didn't officially exist. Whoever this was, they knew him. That changed everything. He slid back to the peephole, scanned the narrow angle outside. 3 men remaining, 1 pacing, 1 near the truck, and 1 walking calmly through the haze, hands at his sides. No weapons drawn. He stepped into full view. Slim frame, black boots, tactical pants, buttoned-down shirt open at the collar, mid-40s, cold eyes and a slight limp, like someone who'd seen battle and came back grinning. Jim opened the door halfway. "You know me," he said. The man stopped 10 feet away. "I knew of you," the man replied. "Didn't expect to meet you, but here we are." Jim didn't flinch. "You know what I did back then?" The man smiled thinly. "I know what you still do." Silence passed between them, thick as heat. "You're not just here for money," Jim said. "No." "Your daughter's name came up in Monterey. She's been helping someone. A woman who stole from us, tried to run. Your girl stitched her up and didn't ask questions. That's rare in your country." "She's a nurse," Jim said. "She treats who walks in the door. Doesn't mean she knew." The man tilted his head. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do. You know that better than most." Then came the offer. "Hand her over. We walk. You live. This ends tonight." Jim almost laughed. "You should have done your homework. There's no universe where I give her to you." The man nodded, unfazed. "Then you die first." That's when Jim saw it, through the haze behind the truck. A 4th man, sniper position, elevated on a pile of rusted fencing. He turned and yelled. Down. Emily hit the floor just as the bullet ripped through the wall above her. Jim fired back through the same hole, 3 rounds in rapid succession. A scream. Then silence. He ducked back. 3 left, he muttered. Emily looked up from the ground, her face pale. "Dead. I'm slowing you down." He grabbed her arm, not harsh but firm. "You're why I'm still breathing. Don't ever say that again." From outside, gunfire erupted. They were circling. Jim knew he couldn't hold them off here. The room was a trap now, no rear exit, and eventually they'd breach it. He grabbed a flashbang, thumbed the safety, and pressed it into her palm. "When I say now, you throw this and run for that truck out front, the blue one. What if they shoot? They'll be too blind to aim." He slid the door open a crack, watching shadows pass. "Ready?" She nodded. "Now." She yanked the pin and tossed it just outside the doorway. The blast flared like lightning, and Jim was already moving, rifle up. Two men staggered in the open. He fired center mass, both collapsing with the same crunch of bone and cloth. He turned just in time to see Emily break through the smoke and scramble into the driver's seat of the blue pickup. Then the final man stepped into view. The one with the limp. He wasn't firing. Not yet. Jim raised his weapon. The man did, too. They fired at the same time. The cartel's bullet nicked Jim's shoulder, spinning him slightly. Jim's shot punched into the man's chest, center left. He staggered, but didn't fall. Jim advanced, gun steady. The man chuckled through blood. El Phantasma. No wonder they never caught you. Then he dropped to his knees, coughing. Jim stood over him, barrel inches from the man's face. "You tell them," Jim said, voice like gravel. "You tell every man with a patch south of the river. If they touch her again, they don't get a warning." The man smiled one last time, then slumped backward, still. Jim turned, panting. Emily revved the engine, waving him in. He limped toward her, clutching his arm. The adrenaline was wearing off. But he wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. They were alive. But the storm hadn't passed. It had just learned his name. The blue pickup ate up the miles, its tires groaning under the weight of two battered souls and a duffel full of ammunition. Emily gripped the wheel tighter than she meant to, knuckles pale, eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror. Her father hadn't said a word since they left the silo. He just sat there, pressing a makeshift bandage to his bleeding shoulder, breathing through his nose like he was trying not to fall apart. She kept glancing over, wanting to ask if he was okay, but the look on his face, the one that said every second of pain was being shelved for later, kept her silent. Finally she spoke. "You're bleeding through that shirt." Jim didn't look at her. "Just a graze." "Doesn't look like a graze." He turned, eyes like stone. "You hit that pothole any harder, we won't need to worry about gunfire." Emily gave a weak, breathless laugh. It felt good, even if it only lasted a second. Jim looked back out the window, scanning the horizon. "How much gas?" She checked him. "Quarter tank. Maybe a little more." He nodded. "Enough to make it to Vaughn's." Emily's brows pulled together. "One?" Jim shifted, wincing slightly as he sat upright. "Friend. Not the kind you send Christmas cards to. The kind you call when you've got cartel blood on your boots and no backup coming." Emily frowned. "Are we running?" "No," Jim said. "We're loading up." She didn't reply. It was quiet again. The road hummed beneath them. A hawk circled overhead. Then, softly, Emily asked what had been burning in her mind since he pulled her out of that shack. "Why didn't you freeze up?" Jim's eyes didn't leave the road. "What? You came in there alone, outnumbered, no guarantee I was even alive. Why didn't you—" "Hesitate." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he cracked the window an inch, letting in the sharp desert wind. "Because I'd been on the other side of that wall," he said quietly. "In places with no rescue, no radio, where you hear your buddy screaming through a concrete barrier and you can't do a damn thing." His voice turned hollow, like it was drifting through time. "I told myself a long time ago, if I ever got the chance to kick the door in for someone who couldn't, I would." Emily didn't speak. She just stared ahead, jaw tight, emotions wrestling behind her eyes. They drove another 15 minutes before Jim told her to slow. "Turn here," he said, pointing to a dirt trail barely visible between two dying mesquites. "You sure?" "Yeah, Vaughn doesn't advertise." She took a turn. The path twisted for a mile, then opened to a clearing hidden behind a cluster of trees. At its center sat a rust-colored barn, a solar panel on the roof, and 3 black dogs chained up near the entrance. A windmill creaked nearby, groaning like a sentinel long overdue for rest. Emily parked. Jim opened the door and winced as his boots hit the dirt. He limped forward without waiting, and one of the dogs barked sharply, but stopped the moment it saw him. From the barn, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, bearded, wearing a hat stained from sun and blood alike. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, not quite aimed, not quite casual. "Been a long time, Dalton," the man said. Jim nodded. "Still got your perimeter set like Fort Knox." Vaughn chuckled and spat into the dust. "Can't be too careful, especially when people like you show up bleeding." Jim turned and gestured behind him. "She's my daughter. They took her. I got her out, but more are coming." Vaughn's face changed. Not surprise, just calculation. Wariness. He knew the stakes now. Hotel, golf, might have been a splinter, not sure, but they had good eyes. One of 'em knew me, by name. Vaughn whistled low. "Well, damn. You brought the devil right to my door, didn't you?" "I didn't have much choice." Vaughn sighed and opened the barn door wider. "Get in here. You're lucky I don't believe in karma." Inside, the barn wasn't filled with livestock. It was steel and shelves, rows of crates and gear, more armory than ranch. Emily stopped in her tracks. "What is all this?" Vaughn smirked, pulling back a tarp to reveal a belt-fed M249. "Preparedness. My old unit didn't like the word retired. They liked sidelined. So I kept the toys, just in case." Emily looked to her father. Jim nodded toward a bench. "Sit down. I'll patch this myself." As he dropped his pack and started pulling out gauze, Vaughn stepped beside him. "They track you here?" "Maybe. Doubt it. They're still licking wounds." Vaughn scratched his beard. "I can call a few guys, old recon buddies, still sharp, still mean." "Don't need a war zone," Jim said. "No, but you might need a message." Emily sat down, silent again. Then she spoke up. "They said something, one of them, about me, that I helped a woman, someone who crossed them." Jim froze. "Do you know who?" Emily shook her head. "I never got her name. She'd been stabbed. Said she fell on barbed wire. I didn't ask questions." Vaughn gave her a sideways glance. "Barbed wire with a serrated edge, maybe." She swallowed. "Did I start this?" "No," Jim said. "They did." He stood, blood-soaked gauze on the ground, new bandage secured. "But if they want you that bad," he continued, "then this isn't random. They're using you to draw someone else out. They're trying to send a message." Vaughn tapped a steel locker. "Then we send one back, loud and clear." Jim looked him in the eye. "Just one question." "What's that?" "If we go loud, we don't stop halfway." Vaughn's face hardened. "I never learned how to pull a punch." Then, for the first time in hours, Jim let the faintest smile touch his face. "Good, 'cause I know exactly where to hit next." Emily looked between them, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. And when it ended, it wouldn't be in whispers, it would end with thunder. The storm had been gathering quietly behind the curtain of the desert for years. Layers of cartel networks, blood money, corrupt eyes, and buried bodies that no one would dig for. But tonight, in the empty outskirts of Hudspeth County, that storm was going to break. And it wouldn't be quiet anymore. Jim stood in Vaughn's barn, staring down at a spread of weapons laid out on the table like instruments in a surgeon's kit. Each one cleaned, checked, loaded. There was nothing fancy about the setup. No military-grade drone support, no high-tech surveillance. Just sweat, sand, steel, and men who had been killing long before some cartel lieutenant learned how to spell territory. Vaughn snapped a magazine into a battle-worn scar and looked over. "Last chance to change your mind, Dalton." Jim responded without looking up. "You think I came here for advice?" Vaughn chuckled. "I think you came here because you needed someone who still knows how to shoot straight without asking permission." "Exactly." They packed in silence, their movements clockwork. Every pouch had a purpose. Every strap was snug. No wasted gear. Jim had already memorized the route. An old rail path used once for hauling cattle, then abandoned after a landslide wiped half of it into the gorge. Now it served a darker trade. 2 weeks earlier, a drone image had tagged movement there. Luis had sent it over that morning, quietly, off the books. Jim knew what it was the second he saw the pattern. A forward operating site. Not just a safe house, a processing point. Women, drugs, weapons. Sorted, tagged, and routed. And someone had decided Emily's face belonged in that system. He clipped a radio to his vest and turned to Vaughn. 20 minutes out? Closer to 15 if we hit the pass hard. You bring Clay? He's out front. Gears in the Bronco. He's even meaner than you remember. Jim snorted. Oop, he's got more gas than stories this time. They moved out together, footsteps pounding against dry earth. Emily waited in the truck, her jaw set, her eyes hollow. She wore a borrowed windbreaker too big for her, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hands rested in her lap. But her fingers twitched. You don't have to go, Jim said, sliding into the passenger seat. I know, she said. I want to. Vaughn and Clay climbed into the Bronco ahead, the engine coughing to life, headlights off. Emily followed at a distance, bouncing through the ruts in the dirt trail, dust swirling behind them in streaks of ghost light beneath the moon. Jim watched her, silent, proud. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. But she was here. That counted. At the mouth of the pass, the vehicles split. Vaughn and Clay looped west, circling the ridge line to take the high position. Jim and Emily parked beneath an outcrop, the truck tucked beneath desert brush. Jim opened the glove box, pulling out a radio and handing it to her. You hear shots, you don't wait. You drive east. Straight to the highway. You got 10 miles of nothing between here and the gas station. She stared at him. I won't leave you. You will. If it goes wrong, you don't argue. You survive. Got it? Tears welled, but she blinked them away fast. I got it. Jim touched her shoulder, just once, gently, then grabbed his rifle and disappeared into the night. The forward sight wasn't well lit, but that was intentional. Cartel camps relied on natural cover and heavy muscle. The nearest structure was a long steel container flanked by 2 guard stations and ringed with low fencing. 1 watchtower, unmanned. 1 Humvee, no plates. 2 lanterns swinging from metal poles like old ghosts. From his perch on the hill, Vaughn radioed in. 4 outside, 2 with AKs. 1 looks half asleep. Jim adjusted his scope. Clay, watching the rear, saw 2 enter the container. Could be more inside. At the end, got 1, but it's makeshift. Could fry more than their radios. Jim thought for a beat. Hitting in 5. He moved into position, crawling low, pressing himself into the dirt. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of burnt oil and sweat. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A man laughed. Sharp. Cruel. Then, in the blackness, a sudden pulse of light flickered from the ridge. Vaughn's EMP went off with a soft thump, like a firework held in someone's chest. The camp reacted instantly. Radios crackled, then died. A man yelled something in Spanish. Jim fired. The first target dropped, neck snapped backward. The second scrambled for cover behind the Humvee. Another shot. Shoulder wound. He cried out and rolled under the vehicle. The camp descended into chaos. Shadows sprinted through the dark. Someone opened fire blindly, rounds zipping past like angry bees. Then a louder voice emerged, barking orders in fluent English. Hold your fire. Check sectors. Move now. Jim's eyes narrowed. That wasn't a smuggler, that was military trained. He switched angles, scanning for the source. There, stepping out of the container. The man from the silo. The one who knew Jim's name. He survived. Jim steadied his rifle and whispered, Of course you did. But before he could fire, the man turned and grabbed a hostage, female, bleeding, bound, not Emily. Another nurse, another victim. Sniper, hold, Vaughn said over comms. They've got leverage. Jim hissed through clenched teeth. Then the man's voice echoed across the camp. I know it's you, Dalton. You want to play hero? Step into the light. Jim didn't move. Your girl, she was supposed to be a message. Now, I'll use her to deliver one." That's when the shot rang out, not from Jim, but from the rear. Clay. The bullet slammed into the man's leg, dropping him to one knee. He didn't scream, he just snarled and shoved the hostage forward, drawing his weapon as he hobbled behind a crate. Vaughn opened fire from above, sending a burst into the camp that shredded tents and equipment. Jim pushed forward, fast, sweeping through the perimeter with surgical precision. One by one, the guards fell. Inside the container, he found cages, 4 of them, 2 empty, 2 occupied. He opened the first. The woman inside flinched, then whispered, "They took the others last night. They're moving them east." Jim's chest tightened. There were more. He keyed the radio. "Emily, drive in, lights off. Bring the truck close. We're pulling survivors." "Copy," she replied. Her voice was strong. 10 minutes later, the truck's headlights cut through the black, bouncing over the uneven terrain. Emily jumped out, helped the women into the back. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. Then a figure stepped from the shadows. The man with the limp, bleeding but alive, pistol aimed at her. Jim saw it a split second before she did. "Emily, down!" She ducked. Jim fired. This time the shot didn't just drop him, it ended him. He fell face first in the dust, arms splayed, the pistol tumbling into silence. Emily looked back, wide-eyed, then ran to Jim and threw her arms around him. "I told you not to leave cover," he said, his voice strained but warm. "I told you I wasn't going to." They stood in the middle of the wreckage, wind pulling at their clothes, and for the first time since it began, the air felt still. But they both knew it wasn't the end. Not yet. The morning light broke slowly over the desert, filtering through the smoke that lingered in the air like the last breath of a dying animal. The camp was silent now, silent in that final uneasy way only war zones could be, the kind of silence that meant it was over, for now. Jim sat on the back bumper of the truck, elbows resting on his knees, his rifle finally lowered and resting across his lap. His shoulder was bandaged tighter than before, but his posture showed the toll. Every inch of him marked by the price paid in hours no man should have to spend. Across from him, Emily crouched beside one of the rescued women, wrapping her in a blanket, speaking in a soft tone she must have learned long ago at the clinic. Her hands moved like a healer's, but her face still bore the grit of someone who had stared down death and walked through it. The fire in her hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had solidified. Jim watched her. He didn't interrupt. "You ever gonna sit still long enough to let someone look at that arm?" she asked, not even turning. Jim smirked faintly. "You've looked at it 4 times already. Then maybe sit still long enough to let me look at it a 5th, this time with actual gauze instead of your war paint." He shook his head. There was something comforting in the way she bossed him around. The sun climbed higher, and the last of Vaughn's reinforcements arrived. Quiet men in dusty clothes and hard eyes, the kind that didn't need explanations. Clay nodded to Jim as he passed, leading the others to gather weapons, destroy files, torch anything that could identify the women or the location. They were erasing the place, not hiding it, burying it. The less the world remembered it existed, the better. Jim stood and stretched slowly, wincing at the pull in his ribs. Vaughn walked over, chewing on a toothpick. "Carnal's going to feel this one." Jim nodded. "They'll regroup. Maybe not here." Vaughn paused, then glanced over to Emily. "You taught her well." Jim followed his gaze. "She taught herself. You going to take her home now?" "That's the plan." "And then what?" Jim didn't answer for a moment. Then finally, "Then I live. For once." Vaughn didn't push further, just extended a hand. "Give it a few days before you disappear off my grid again." Jim took the handshake. "Solid. Final. I'll send a postcard." By mid-afternoon, they were back on the road. This time, Emily drove the Bronco Vaughn loaned them. The rescued women were safe, loaded in a separate vehicle, with two of Vaughn's crew escorting them to a secure shelter run by a non-profit Jim had once quietly funded. A safe house built by ghosts for the forgotten. Jim stared out the window, finally letting the rhythm of the tires lull the fire out of his bones. The war was behind him again. This one, at least. Emily broke the quiet. "I want to testify." Jim turned to her. "For who?" "For the others, the ones they're still taking. I can ID faces, sights, names they said out loud. That's dangerous." "I know." He studied her profile. The same jawline as her mother. The same steel behind the softness. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure I can't not be." He leaned back, proud and terrified in equal measure. At a gas station near Marfa they stopped. It was almost comical, the banality of filling up the tank after surviving a gunfight. Jim leaned against the vehicle while Emily went inside. She returned minutes later with 2 coffees and a small brown paper bag. "What's this?" he asked. "Jerky, your favorite."
He smiled. "You remember the kind? I'm not the one with a concussion." He actually laughed, for the first time in days, maybe in years. They stood there, father and daughter, under a rattling tin awning, chewing jerky and sipping coffee like the world wasn't upside down, like it was just another long drive, like they weren't different people now. "You know," Emily said after a while, "I used to think you were unbreakable." Jim raised an eyebrow. "And now I know better." He waited. "But I also know you're the kind of man who puts himself back together anyway." He didn't respond, just looked down, swallowing hard. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You saved me, Dad." He squeezed back, eyes wet. "You saved yourself. I just kicked the door open." They drove the rest of the way home with the windows down, letting the desert wind carry off the last of the blood and fire. As they pulled into the long gravel driveway, the farmhouse came into view. Quiet, sun-drenched, and standing exactly as they left it. Jim parked and shut off the engine. They didn't speak. Didn't have to. Emily stepped out first, her boots crunching against the gravel. She looked up at the house, at the porch swing that had once been her reading spot as a kid. Her throat tightened. Behind her, Jim stood, looking not at the house, but at the open sky. No helicopters, no gunfire, no voices whispering in a language they didn't understand. Just peace. It didn't feel real yet. Inside, everything was exactly as they left it. Jim's maps still sat on the table. The coffee pot blinked 12 o'clock. Emily walked through slowly, letting the familiarity wash over her like a wave. She paused in the hallway and looked at the family photo, still hanging by the stairs. Her, Jim, and her mother, back when her world still made sense. She touched it softly. "Welcome home," Jim said from behind her. She turned. "You too." That night, the sky over Texas was wide and clear. Jim sat on the porch with a beer in his hand and a rifle at his feet. Not because he expected trouble, but because he wasn't the type to sit unarmed. Emily joined him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, cup of tea in her hands. "Think they'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but not tonight." And that was enough, because some battles don't need medals. Some wars aren't marked by lines on maps. And sometimes the victory isn't in the final shot, but in the simple act of going home together, still standing, still free.